Imagine a family so influential that decisions made thousands of miles away can change the price of gasoline in your city, the cost of your next airline ticket, and even the performance of your retirement portfolio. That family is the House of Saud. Every day, billions of people buy gasoline, board airplanes, heat their homes, or purchase products that depend on oil. Few realize that behind much of this global energy system stands a single kingdom whose influence stretches far beyond its borders. Saudi Arabia is home to one of the world's largest known oil reserves, the world's most valuable energy company, and one of the largest sovereign wealth funds ever created. At the center of this economic powerhouse is the House of Saud, a royal family whose collective wealth has been estimated by some analysts at around $1.4 trillion, though measuring their true economic influence is far more complex than calculating the fortune of a billionaire. Unlike business leaders whose wealth can be tracked through public company shares, the Saudi royal family's power is intertwined with the institutions of an entire nation. Their influence reaches into energy markets, global finance, technology, tourism, infrastructure, sports, and some of the world's most ambitious development projects. But this raises a fascinating question. How did one royal family become one of the most economically powerful dynasties in modern history? Is their fortune really measured in trillions of dollars? How much belongs to individual royals? And how much represents state-owned assets? And as Saudi Arabia attempts to reduce its dependence on oil, what does the future of this extraordinary economic empire look like? In this documentary, we'll separate myths from facts, explore the business foundations behind the kingdom's immense wealth, and examine how the House of Saud transformed a desert kingdom into one of the most influential financial powers on earth. To understand that transformation, we first need to understand the family behind it, and how a dynasty founded in the Arabian desert came to shape one of the world's most powerful economies. To understand one of the world's most powerful economic empires, we first need to understand the family behind it. Today, the House of Saud rules the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, but its story began long before skyscrapers, sovereign wealth funds, or trillion-dollar estimates. More than a century ago, much of the Arabian Peninsula was divided among competing tribes and regional rulers. Political authority was fragmented, trade routes were uncertain, and the region's economy relied largely on agriculture, livestock, pilgrimage, and local commerce. Everything changed in the early 20th century. In 1902, Abdulaziz Ibn Saud, better known in the West as Ibn Saud, recaptured the city of Riyadh, marking the beginning of a decades-long campaign to unite the Arabian Peninsula. Through a combination of military victories, tribal alliances, and political negotiations, he steadily expanded his control. In 1932, these territories were officially unified into the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, with Ibn Saud becoming its first king. The monarchy he established continues to govern the country today. Unlike constitutional monarchies, where royal families serve largely ceremonial roles, Saudi Arabia is an absolute monarchy. Executive authority ultimately rests with the king, who serves as both head of state and head of government. Senior members of the royal family occupy many of the kingdom's most influential leadership positions, overseeing ministries, security institutions, strategic economic initiatives, and key national organizations. This structure has helped the House of Saud remain one of the world's longest ruling modern dynasties. The royal family itself is enormous. Public estimates suggest it includes around 15,000 members spread across multiple generations. However, not every prince or princess enjoys the same level of influence. Political authority, strategic decision-making, and access to major economic institutions are concentrated among a much smaller circle of senior royal, often estimated at roughly 2,000 individuals, with real executive power centered even more narrowly around the king, the crown prince, and a handful of trusted advisors. This distinction is important because discussions about the family's wealth can be misleading. When headlines describe the House of Saud as the world's richest royal family, they're not suggesting that every royal possesses billions of dollars in personal assets. Instead, Those estimates generally reflect the extraordinary concentration of political influence, family-held assets, historic land ownership, business interests, and close connections to the institutions that manage one of the world's largest resource-based economies. In many ways, the House of Saud operates differently from the billionaire families that dominate global wealth rankings. Their influence is not built around a single publicly traded company or privately owned corporation. Instead, it is rooted in governing a nation whose economic foundations have shaped global energy markets for decades. But for much of its history, Saudi Arabia was not defined by extraordinary wealth. Before vast oil reserves were discovered beneath its desert landscape, the kingdom was a country with limited natural resources, modest government revenues, and little indication that it would one day become one of the most economically influential nations on earth. That discovery would change not only Saudi Arabia's future, but the global economy itself. When Saudi Arabia was founded in 1932, it was not the economic giant the world recognizes today. The kingdom's economy was modest and depended on traditional industries. Trade caravans crossed the desert, agriculture supported local communities where water allowed, and millions of Muslim pilgrims visiting the holy cities of Mecca and Medina generated an important source of income. While these activities sustained the young nation, government revenues remained limited, and building modern infrastructure required resources the country simply did not have. Yet beneath the vast deserts of eastern Arabia lay a resource that would redefine not only Saudi Arabia's future, but the future of the global economy. In the early 1930s, Saudi Arabia granted an oil exploration concession to the Standard Oil Company of California, known today as Chevron. American geologists arrived with hope, but faced harsh conditions. Years of drilling produced disappointing results, and some within the company questioned whether continuing the search was worth the expense. Then in 1938, everything changed. At a site known as Dammam Well Number 7, engineers struck commercially viable oil after years of uncertainty. The discovery proved that Saudi Arabia possessed enormous petroleum reserves. What initially appeared to be a risky exploration project soon became one of the most valuable resource discoveries in modern history. Production expanded rapidly over the following decades. New oil fields were discovered, pipelines stretched across the desert, export terminals were built along the Persian Gulf, and Saudi Arabia gradually emerged as one of the world's leading energy producers. To manage these operations, the American-owned consortium evolved into the Arabian American Oil Company, better known as Aramco. For years, Aramco was managed primarily by American companies that brought technical expertise, capital, and engineering knowledge. But as Saudi Arabia's confidence and capabilities grew, so did its desire to exercise greater control over its most valuable resource. Beginning in the 1970s, the Saudi government gradually increased its ownership of Aramco. By 1980, the company had become fully state-owned, giving the kingdom direct control over one of the largest oil producers in the world. This marked a defining moment in Saudi Arabia's economic history. The country's greatest natural resource was no longer managed from abroad. It was under national ownership. Oil revenues transformed nearly every aspect of Saudi society. Modern highways connected distant regions. International airports welcomed growing numbers of travelers. Universities, hospitals, power stations, and entire cities were built at remarkable speed. Industries expanded, public services improved, and living standards rose dramatically. Within just a few decades, Saudi Arabia had undergone one of the fastest economic transformations ever recorded. But the impact reached far beyond the kingdom's borders. As global demand for energy increased after the Second World War, Saudi Arabia became an indispensable supplier of crude oil. Decisions made in Riyadh began influencing fuel prices in cities thousands of miles away. Economic growth, inflation, transportation costs, manufacturing, and even international diplomacy became increasingly connected to the kingdom's energy production. Membership in the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, or OPEC, further strengthened Saudi Arabia's influence. Because of its vast production capacity and ability to increase or reduce output more quickly than many competitors, the kingdom became one of the most influential voices in the global oil market. Investors, governments, and central banks around the world closely watch Saudi production decisions, recognizing that changes in supply could ripple through the global economy. This new era also transformed the position of the House of Saud. As rulers of a nation whose wealth was increasingly driven by oil, the royal family gained stewardship over an economy generating extraordinary revenues. While those revenues belonged to the Saudi state, not to individual royals, they provided the financial foundation for ambitious national development, expanding government institutions, and eventually some of the world's largest investment initiatives. By the beginning of the 21st century, Saudi Arabia was no longer simply an oil exporter. It had become an economic heavyweight whose influence extended across global energy markets and international finance. Yet relying so heavily on a single natural resource came with a serious challenge. What would happen if the world needed less oil? The answer would lead Saudi Arabia to launch one of the most ambitious economic transformation plans in modern history, starting with the world's most valuable energy company. When people hear claims that the Saudi royal family is worth more than $1 trillion, one name appears almost every time: Saudi Aramco. It is often described as the foundation of the kingdom's wealth, and for good reason. Saudi Aramco is not simply another multinational oil company. It is one of the largest energy producers in history, responsible for supplying millions of barrels of crude oil every day to customers around the world. Its operations span the entire energy value chain, from exploration and drilling to refining, petrochemicals, shipping, and global distribution. In terms of production, reserves, and profitability, few companies have ever operated on a comparable scale. Over the decades, Aramco has generated hundreds of billions of dollars in annual revenue during strong energy markets. Even as oil prices fluctuate, the company has consistently ranked among the world's most profitable businesses. Its financial performance often surpasses that of many of the world's largest technology and consumer companies combined. This extraordinary profitability is possible because Saudi Arabia possesses some of the world's largest proven oil reserves, many of which can be produced at comparatively low cost. That combination, vast reserves and relatively efficient production, has allowed Aramco to remain highly competitive even during periods of lower oil prices. But there's an important distinction that is often overlooked. Saudi Aramco is not the personal property of the royal family. The company is majority owned by the Saudi state. While a small percentage of its shares trade publicly on the Saudi Stock Exchange, the government remains the dominant shareholder. As a result, Aramco's profits primarily flow to the Saudi government through dividends, taxes, and royalties, helping finance public services, infrastructure projects, and national development. This distinction matters because it changes how we understand the wealth of the House of Saud. The royal family does not receive Aramco's entire annual profits as personal income. Instead, their influence comes from governing the state that controls one of the world's most valuable energy companies. In other words, their economic power is closely connected to the institutions of the kingdom rather than direct ownership of every dollar generated by Aramco. That relationship is one reason why estimating the family's wealth is so difficult. Analysts can calculate the market value of a publicly traded company or estimate an individual's stock portfolio. Measuring the economic influence of a ruling dynasty that oversees state-owned assets, strategic industries, and national investment vehicles is far more complex. Aramco's importance extends well beyond Saudi Arabia's borders. At various points, Saudi Aramco has been valued higher than the GDP of many countries and has ranked among the world's most valuable publicly traded companies. Every day, crude oil produced by the company fuels cars, powers factories, supports airlines, enables global shipping, and supplies raw materials for countless products used around the world. Plastics, synthetic fabrics, fertilizers, pharmaceuticals, electronics, and packaging all rely, in some way, on the global petroleum industry. That means Aramco is not only selling energy, it is supporting industries that shape modern life. The company's financial success has also given Saudi Arabia something even more valuable than oil revenue: options. For decades, the kingdom used energy income to build roads, ports, airports, schools, hospitals, and modern cities. But as leaders began thinking beyond oil, those revenues started funding a different kind of investment strategy, one designed to prepare the country for a future in which petroleum may no longer dominate the global economy. Instead of spending every dollar earned from oil, Saudi Arabia increasingly began investing a portion of that wealth into businesses, technology, tourism, infrastructure, renewable energy, entertainment, and international assets. The goal was simple in theory, but enormous in scale: transform today's oil wealth into tomorrow's diversified economy. To accomplish that mission, the kingdom turned to an institution that has become one of the most powerful investors on the planet: the Public Investment Fund. But even one of the world's most profitable energy companies couldn't answer a question that every resource-rich nation eventually faces: what happens when the resource that built your economy can no longer guarantee your future? Saudi Arabia's answer was to begin investing beyond oil. For decades, oil made Saudi Arabia wealthy. But the kingdom's leaders understood a simple economic reality: no matter how valuable oil is today, relying too heavily on a single resource carries long-term risks. Energy prices rise and fall. New technologies emerge. Governments invest in renewable energy. Electric vehicles become more common. Global demand changes over time. The question was no longer how to produce more oil. It was how to ensure the kingdom remained prosperous even if the world eventually needed less of it. The answer was to transform temporary resource wealth into long-term investment wealth. At the center of that strategy is the Public Investment Fund, better known as the PF. Founded in 1971, the fund originally played a relatively modest role in supporting domestic development. But over the past decade, it has evolved into one of the world's largest sovereign wealth funds, managing assets worth hundreds of billions of dollars. Its mission extends far beyond preserving national wealth. It is designed to help reshape the Saudi economy by investing in industries that can generate growth for decades to come. Unlike a private investment company focused on maximizing quarterly profits, the PIF also serves broader national objectives. It backs projects intended to diversify the economy, create new industries, attract foreign investment, and reduce dependence on oil revenues. In many ways, the fund acts like a long-term strategic investor with a national mandate. Its investment portfolio stretches across nearly every major sector of the global economy: technology companies, transportation, renewable energy, artificial intelligence, healthcare, gaming, real estate, tourism, infrastructure, financial services, and professional sports. Some investments seek financial returns. Others aim to bring knowledge, technology, and international partnerships back into Saudi Arabia. Together, they reflect a broader strategy: using today's oil income to finance tomorrow's economy. Perhaps nowhere is this ambition more visible than in the kingdom's Vision 2030 program. Announced in 2016, Vision 2030 is Saudi Arabia's long-term blueprint for economic transformation. Rather than allowing oil to remain the country's dominant source of income indefinitely, the plan seeks to expand sectors such as tourism, manufacturing, logistics, mining, entertainment, renewable energy, and advanced technology. The Public Investment Fund plays a central role in financing many of these initiatives. Some projects are extraordinary in scale. NEOM, for example, is envisioned as a futuristic region powered by advanced technology and renewable energy. Other developments include luxury tourism destinations along the Red Sea, major entertainment venues, industrial zones, and transportation infrastructure designed to attract businesses and visitors from around the world. At the same time, the fund has become an increasingly visible global investor. It has taken stakes in international companies, invested in electric vehicle manufacturers, supported technology ventures, financed infrastructure projects, and expanded into global sports and entertainment. These investments have placed Saudi Arabia at the center of conversations that extend far beyond energy markets. Supporters argue that this approach is a logical use of national wealth. Instead of relying solely on oil exports, the kingdom is attempting to build new engines of economic growth that can generate jobs, encourage innovation, and provide future income as the global energy landscape evolves. Critics, however, question whether some of the kingdom's ambitious projects can achieve their intended economic returns. Others argue that high-profile investments in sports and entertainment also serve to strengthen Saudi Arabia's international image alongside their commercial objectives. Whatever one's perspective, there is little disagreement about one point. Few governments have attempted economic diversification on such an ambitious scale. Understanding the Public Investment Fund also helps explain another common misunderstanding. When headlines report that the Saudi royal family controls hundreds of billions of dollars through the PF, they do not mean that individual royals can freely spend those assets. The fund is owned by the Saudi state and operates under a formal governance structure with investment mandates and long-term national objectives. While senior leaders, including Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, who chairs the fund, play a significant role in shaping its direction, its assets are distinct from the personal fortunes of individual members of the royal family. This distinction is essential. The influence of the House of Saud comes not only from personal wealth, but also from leading institutions that oversee vast national resources and investment vehicles. That combination of political authority, natural resources, and financial capital has created an economic position unlike almost any other in the modern world. But while institutions such as Aramco and the Public Investment Fund dominate discussions about Saudi Arabia's economy, people remain fascinated by a different question. How wealthy are the royals themselves? Separating personal fortunes from state assets is far more complicated than it appears, and the answers are often less straightforward than the headlines suggest. Yet despite these enormous national investments, public curiosity has always returned to the same question. How much wealth belongs to the royal family itself? After exploring Saudi Arabia's oil industry and its global investment strategy, one question still remains. How much money do members of the Saudi royal family actually own? It's a simple question with no simple answer. Unlike many of the world's wealthiest entrepreneurs, Saudi royals are not required to publicly disclose the full extent of their personal assets. Their wealth is often spread across privately held businesses, investment companies, real estate, land holdings, and family trusts. As a result, even respected financial publications can arrive at very different estimates. This is why you'll often see headlines claiming that the House of Saud is worth around $1.4 trillion. That figure is best understood as an estimate of the broader family's economic influence and connected assets, not the combined balances of thousands of individual bank accounts. The distinction is significant. Collective influence and personal ownership are not the same thing. Among the thousands of members of the royal family, only a relatively small number are believed to possess fortunes measured in the billions of dollars. Many others live privileged lives compared with the average Saudi citizen, but their financial resources vary considerably depending on their position within the family and their business interests. One of the most closely watched figures is King Salman bin Abdulaziz Al Saud. As the custodian of the two holy mosques and the King of Saudi Arabia, he sits at the center of the kingdom's political leadership. Public estimates of his personal wealth vary widely, with many reports placing it in the tens of billions of dollars. However, because much of his influence is connected to state institutions rather than publicly disclosed personal assets, no independent figure can be verified with certainty. Even more widely known in international business circles is Prince Al-Walid bin Talal. Unlike many senior royals whose fortunes remain largely private, Prince Al-Walid built his reputation as a global investor. Through Kingdom Holding Company, he assembled stakes in international businesses spanning banking, hospitality, real estate, media, and technology. Over the years, his investment portfolio has included shares in companies such as Citigroup, Apple, X, formerly Twitter, and major hotel brands, making him one of the most recognizable investors in the Middle East. Depending on market conditions and valuation methods, estimates of his personal fortune have ranged from the low teens to well above $20 billion. His investment style earned comparisons with some of the world's most prominent value investors, although his portfolio reflected a broader mix of international industries and strategic holdings. Then there is Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Unlike Prince Al-Walid, his influence is defined less by a publicly visible personal investment portfolio and more by his leadership of Saudi Arabia's economic transformation. As the driving force behind Vision 2030 and chairman of the Public Investment Fund, he oversees institutions managing hundreds of billions of dollars in national assets. This distinction is often misunderstood. While headlines sometimes blur the line between assets under his leadership and assets he personally owns, those are fundamentally different concepts. Leading an institution worth hundreds of billions of dollars does not mean personally owning those assets. In fact, this confusion illustrates one of the greatest challenges in measuring the wealth of ruling families. When a billionaire's fortune rises, analysts can often trace the increase to the value of publicly traded shares. When a leader of a monarchy oversees state-owned enterprises, sovereign investment funds, and strategic national assets, the relationship between political authority and personal wealth becomes much harder to define. That is why credible researchers usually avoid presenting exact figures as established facts. Instead, they distinguish between three different forms of wealth. First, personal wealth, assets directly owned by an individual. Second, family wealth, assets shared across generations through private businesses, land holdings, and investments. And finally, state-controlled assets, resources owned by the government but managed through institutions led by senior members of the royal family. Confusing these categories can produce dramatic headlines, but it rarely produces an accurate picture. What can be said with confidence is this: few families in modern history have combined political authority, economic influence, and access to strategic national resources on the scale of the House of Saud. Whether measured through personal fortunes, family-owned assets, or leadership over one of the world's largest resource-based economies, their influence extends far beyond traditional wealth rankings. Yet extraordinary wealth is only one part of the story. For decades, members of the royal family have become symbols of extraordinary luxury, owning sprawling palaces, private aircraft, super yachts, rare works of art, and some of the world's most exclusive properties. But how much of that image reflects reality, and how much is myth? To answer that, we need to look beyond the balance sheets and into the lifestyle that has captured global attention for decades. But balance sheets tell only part of the story. The visible symbols of wealth, from palaces to private aircraft, have helped shape the global image of the House of Saud. The question is whether that image reflects the full reality.